By the time Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in 1992, the world already knew him as one of the most disturbing serial killers in modern American history. He had confessed to killing 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991, committing acts of necrophilia and cannibalism that shocked even seasoned investigators. But few expected what would unfold in the final chapter of his life, inside the walls of Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Dahmer arrived at the maximum security prison in early 1992. The media circus surrounding his case didn't stop at the courtroom doors. For months, news outlets speculated about his safety, his behavior, and how the justice system would manage a criminal so notorious. Prison officials initially kept Dahmer in solitary confinement for his own protection, aware that other inmates might target him. In those first months, Dahmer reportedly spent up to 23 hours a day in his cell. He had limited contact with others and was under constant observation. While some might have expected him to show remorse or fear, he was described by prison staff as oddly calm, even polite. He spent his time reading the Bible, watching television, and writing letters to supporters and pen pals. These letters, some of which have since surfaced, reveal a man trying to reshape his public image as a reformed sinner. One of the most surprising developments during Dahmer's time behind bars was his conversion to Christianity. He was baptized in 1994 by a local preacher in the prison's whirlpool tub. This event drew public fascination and controversy. Some saw it as a calculated move for sympathy, while others, including his family, believed it to be sincere. His father, Lionel Dahmer, supported his son's religious awakening and publicly advocated for the belief that Jeffrey had truly changed. Over time, Dahmer requested to be moved from solitary into the general population, insisting that he no longer feared for his life. Prison administrators, facing public scrutiny and budgetary pressures, eventually granted the request. It would prove to be a fatal decision. Within the general population, Dahmer reportedly kept to himself but also developed a reputation. He made dark jokes about his crimes, shaped his food to resemble body parts, and left mock, severed limbs in the prison cafeteria. These actions earned him both notoriety and enemies. Some inmates found his behavior offensive and grotesque. Others viewed it as a power play, a reminder that he was different, even in a place filled with violent criminals. Despite the risks, Dahmer seemed oddly at ease in prison life. He worked cleaning duties and maintained a quiet routine. Prison staff noted that he didn't cause trouble, followed rules, and displayed no signs of aggression. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Jeffrey's quiet demeanor masked the growing resentment among some inmates. While many prisoners received little to no media attention, Dahmer had become a household name. His crimes were discussed in TV specials and documentaries. Some inmates felt the attention he received was unfair, and that the nature of his crimes made him a target for revenge. The prison chaplain, Roy Ratcliffe, who baptized Dahmer, recalled that Jeffrey talked openly about his guilt and desire for forgiveness. Ratcliffe later wrote that Dahmer had asked whether God could truly forgive someone like him. These moments of introspection suggested a man aware of his monstrous legacy, but whether that awareness was sincere or strategic remains a topic of debate. What is certain is that Dahmer's final months were spent in a strange limbo, feared and infamous, yet oddly unguarded. His requests for less isolation and more interaction were honored, despite the risk. He had become both a symbol of evil and a puzzle of human psychology. As he continued his routine in the prison's general population, few could have predicted just how violently his story would end. There were signs, unmistakable ones, that danger was closing in, and yet no one intervened. As Jeffrey Dahmer settled into general population at Columbia Correctional Institution, a volatile tension simmered beneath the surface. His presence was both infamous and provocative. His crimes too grotesque to forget, his demeanor too casual to forgive. Inmates knew who he was, and some believed he didn't deserve the protections or comforts afforded to other prisoners. It wasn't long before Dahmer's prison routine began rubbing others the wrong way. He often joked about his crimes, sometimes loudly, sometimes mockingly. He once used ketchup to mimic blood on his food tray, telling others it was a human organ. What some guards dismissed as dark humor, others saw as deeply offensive provocation. Several inmates voiced complaints about Dahmer's behavior, but little was done. Whether due to understaffing, indifference, or fear of media attention, prison officials allowed him increasing access to common areas and group tasks, without assessing the full risk. One inmate in particular, Christopher Scarver, was quietly growing more disturbed by Dahmer's presence. Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for murder, was described as mentally unstable and had exhibited signs of religious delusions. He reportedly viewed Dahmer's crimes, especially the sexual and cannibalistic aspects, as a moral affront. He found Dahmer's joking attitude toward his victims unbearable. Scarver later told reporters that he believed Dahmer was unrepentant and that prison staff intentionally left them together. Whether that was paranoia or truth remains contested, but it underscores the emotional powder keg building behind bars. Jesse Anderson, another inmate, was also part of the dynamic. Serving time for killing his wife and blaming it on two black men, Anderson was deeply unpopular among the prison's population. The racial undertones of both Anderson's and Dahmer's crimes created a toxic undercurrent. Reports suggest that Dahmer had been assaulted once before in prison, hit with a broomstick, but it was downplayed. Another time, he received threats slipped under his cell door. Guards brushed them off. According to some former staff members, they believed Dahmer was too high-profile for anything serious to happen. Still, the warning signs multiplied. Inmates talked. Guards overheard things. The tension was thick. But despite the red flags, prison officials assigned Dahmer, Scarver, and Anderson to the same work detail, cleaning a prison bathroom unsupervised. In hindsight, this decision seems reckless. Scarver was known to be unstable, Dahmer known to provoke. Yet the three men were left alone in a part of the prison without cameras or immediate guard access. For Scarver, this wasn't just another day. He later claimed to have been given a sign from God to act. Whether that's delusion, justification, or genuine belief, one thing was clear: the powder keg had been lit. Prison officials would later say they had no knowledge of the specific threats to Dahmer's life, but multiple accounts suggest otherwise. The prison system's failure to adequately respond to the escalating risk created the perfect storm. On that November morning, the stage was set. The killer who had once terrified an entire nation was now in the company of men who hated him, with no one watching. November 28, 1994, began like any other day inside Columbia Correctional Institution. But within hours, headlines around the world would erupt with the news. Jeffrey Dahmer was dead. That morning, Dahmer, Christopher Scarver, and Jesse Anderson were assigned to clean the prison's gymnasium and showers, an area with no surveillance cameras and minimal staff supervision. It was an unusual setup, especially given the notoriety of one inmate and the instability of another. Yet somehow the three men were left alone. Accounts differ slightly, but what's clear is that within 20 minutes, two of the most infamous inmates in the prison system were brutally attacked. Scarver later claimed that tensions had been boiling for some time. According to his statements, Dahmer mocked other inmates, made twisted jokes about his crimes, and showed little remorse. Scarver, who had a documented history of mental illness, said he couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a 20-inch metal bar, taken from exercise equipment, Scarver first struck Dahmer in the head. The force of the blow crushed his skull. Then, Scarver turned on Jesse Anderson, inflicting similar injuries. When guards returned, they found Dahmer barely alive and Anderson unconscious. Both were rushed to a nearby hospital. Dahmer was pronounced dead an hour later. Anderson died 2 days after. Scarver would later tell reporters that God had instructed him to kill Dahmer and Anderson. Whether this was the product of religious psychosis or deeply rooted rage, his actions sent shockwaves through the criminal justice system. How did this happen? How could a man as high profile as Jeffrey Dahmer be placed in such a vulnerable situation? Many believe it was more than oversight, it was systemic negligence. Some even speculated that certain staff members wanted Dahmer gone but didn't want the blood on their hands. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no accountability. In the aftermath, prison officials insisted there was no plot, no conspiracy. But critics pointed to the red flags ignored for months: threats, fights, warning signs. Families of Dahmer's victims had mixed reactions. Some expressed relief that he was dead. Others felt robbed of justice through the legal system. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Dahmer's murder remain controversial. Scarver was convicted of the killings and received 2 additional life sentences. He continues to give occasional interviews, changing his account with each one. In the days and weeks following Jeffrey Dahmer's death, public reaction was divided and intense. Some saw his murder as justice finally served, a violent end to a violent man. Others were disturbed by the circumstances surrounding his death and questioned the integrity of the prison system that allowed it to happen. Conspiracy theories emerged almost immediately. Some speculated that Dahmer was intentionally placed in harm's way, that his death was orchestrated by prison officials who had grown tired of managing such a high-profile inmate. Others suggested it was a form of unofficial justice, meted out by a system that failed to protect his victims in life and failed to protect him in death. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections launched an internal investigation, but its findings did little to quell public skepticism. While the report acknowledged lapses in security and oversight, it concluded there was no evidence of intentional wrongdoing. Critics remained unconvinced. The lack of surveillance, the absence of guards, and the known instability of Christopher Scarver raised too many red flags to ignore. The media coverage surrounding Dahmer's death reignited interest in his crimes. Documentaries, books, and interviews flooded the market. His gruesome legacy was re-examined in new ways, often drawing criticism from victim advocacy groups who felt that such attention re-traumatized families and glorified a killer. Dahmer's family, particularly his father Lionel, continued to speak publicly. Lionel maintained that Jeffrey had found peace through religion before his death and believed that his son had sought genuine redemption. Others remained skeptical. The image of Dahmer as a man seeking forgiveness clashed sharply with stories of his mocking behavior behind bars. Christopher Scarver, meanwhile, became a figure of fascination in his own right. He granted multiple interviews, each time providing slightly different accounts of what happened and why. In one version, he said God instructed him to kill Dahmer. In another, he claimed Dahmer's behavior provoked the attack. His inconsistencies only deepened the mystery. Dahmer's death also raised important questions about how the prison system handles mentally ill inmates, both victims and perpetrators. Scarver had a history of delusions and paranoia. Should he have been allowed to interact with high-risk inmates? Should Dahmer have ever been released into general population, considering the nature of his crimes and his public profile? For many, the case underscored the flaws in the American prison system: overcrowded, understaffed, and ill-equipped to handle high-risk inmates or mental illness. The same system that failed to stop Dahmer during his killing spree now stood accused of failing him in custody. In the years since his death, Jeffrey Dahmer has become a grim icon of true crime lore. He is the subject of countless documentaries, dramatizations, and discussions. But beyond the headlines and horror, his story is also a cautionary tale of broken systems, ignored warnings, and the blurred line between justice and vengeance. The disturbing truth behind Dahmer's final days is not just that he died violently, but that he died in a system that knew the danger and did nothing. In the end, the monster met a monstrous fate, one that left more questions than answers. And in that silence, the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer endures, not just as a killer, but as a symptom of everything society failed to see, stop, or heal. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing true crime community.